My name is Rafael Andres Diaz Granados. I am the Executive Director of FIFARMA. On behalf of FIFARMA and the entire team, as well as our partners at FPIA, I wanted to give you guys a very warm welcome to this really important webinar on certificates of pharmaceutical products. I wanted to give a special recognition to all of our speakers, panelists, and the many, many regulators that are joining us for this event. This has been a very interesting 12, 13 months since the start of the pandemic, and industry and regulators have been working together to make it possible so that all patients have access to all the essential medicines and new treatments and vaccines to respond to the COVID-19 health emergency. So I wanted to, extend a warm thank you to everybody who's been working together to make that happen. Look, certificates of pharmaceutical product are crucial documents for regulatory submissions in countries across Latin America and the Caribbean. And the pandemic has introduced challenges both for regulators that issue and use these certificates. And there's a lot of interest in the community on these certificates of pharmaceutical products, and that's demonstrated by the fact that we've got almost 350 participants in the webinar right now. We've got 600 registered participants, including more than 150 regulators from 28 countries across the Americas. So really, very exciting to be able to share some of these thoughts. We want to make use wish that you guys make use of all of the updated information that you will have access to. Please, let's make this interactive. We've got some very prominent panelists that have joined the event. With that, I want to thank again our partners at FPIA and helping us organizing this event, and invite Per Tellner from FPIA to share the objectives of the webinar. Per, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. To start with, I could just inform you that I'm responsible for international regulatory affairs at EFPIA, and I also would like to welcome all of you on behalf of EFPIA to this webinar. And I would like to thank FIFARMA for the partnership in the organization of this event. The background for this webinar is that the Certificate of Pharmaceutical Product is a key document in regulatory processes in emerging markets. And some reference regulatory authorities have introduced new procedures and policies that represent important changes in the way CPPs are issued and used. For example, the EMA has introduced electronic certificate of pharmaceutical product. Some changes have also been introduced because of the pandemic situation, but some of them will remain also when the pandemic is over. WHO has recently updated its certification scheme on the quality of pharmaceutical products moving in international commerce, introducing new recommendations. There's a need for promoting awareness of the new global landscape for the CPP to avoid disruptions in the supply of medicines and promote timely access to medicines by patients. EFPIA and FIFARMA have seen an opportunity to collaborate in the organization of this webinar, with a strong belief that the current challenges might be addressed with further dialogue and clarification. The objective of this webinar is to present and discuss the new policies, procedures, and trends in the issuing and use of CPPs and electronic CPPs during and after the pandemic, and also to promote a reflection both from regulators and industry about the need to adapt to local practices, to rationalize and streamline the use of Certificate of Pharmaceutical Products and electronic Certificate of Pharmaceutical Products, aligning local procedures to international best practices. The agenda contains in-depth presentation of the practices and policies of Europe and of the United States for issuing CPPs and eCPPs. And it's also an opportunity to learn about WHO updated recommendation for countries that issue and use the CPP. And finally, we will have an interactive question and answer sessions with a speaker when also a representative of the Swiss regulator, Swissmedic, will join these question and answer sessions. And we also, for this webinar, have two moderators as well, quite a big audience this time. It's Pedro Franco, who's Director for Global Regulatory and Scientific Policy at Merck Serono, and Camila Gomez, who is Latin American Regulatory Policy Lead at Roche. And Camila is also the chairperson of the Latin American Regulatory Network of EFP. And with these words, I now give the floor to the moderators.
Thanks a lot, Per, and Rafael for this warm welcome and explaining the objectives. At this time, I'd like to invite the audience. You will see that you have Q&A option in the menu and in a chat as well. So please, if you use the Q&A to add your questions while the speakers are presenting, you can add your questions in English or in Spanish. And during the presentations, please don't wait until the last minute. And with that, I would like to invite Dr. Alberto Ganan from the European Medicines Agency. That will be our first speaker of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Camila. Gracias, Camila.
First, I want to thank FIFARMA and FIFARMA, the organization of this event, and to put together all the regulatory authorities that issue electronic certificates with the regulatory authorities from importation and together with the industry. It is a pleasure for me to be with you and present the EMA practices and policies for issuing CPP. Next slide, please. Thanks. Digital transformation is a key priority area for all institutions and for the European Medicines Agency. As it was in our strategy from 2025. Approximately 1 year ago, on March 30, EMA was pioneer on issuing electronic certificates for medicinal products. The agency had been working on this initiative for a long time. However, with the pandemic and the remotely work, the agency implemented this strategy at the beginning of the pandemic. This allows that we could keep issuing electronic certificates to all the authorities and facilitate the regulatory compliance, and at the end, maintain the access for medicines in importing countries. When we launched this initiative, we consult with the World Health Organization, and they support this initiative and confirm that it was compatible with the requirements with the issuing certificate system from the WHO on which we base to issue the certificates. Also, the WHO recommend to other regulatory authorities this type of initiative and urge authorities receiving certificates to accept the electronic signature issued by the agency. Next slide, please. It has been 1 year experience issuing electronic certificates. It has been very positive experience. During this year, we have issued more than 12,000 electronic certificates from 3,700 requests for 136 importing authorities. We need to say that the electronic certificates have been widely accepted by the regulatory authorities of the importing countries, and in the agency we have not received any report of any electronic certificate refused by any authority of the importing countries. We can conclude the certificates have been widely accepted. On the other part, as I'm going to present in the next slides, the electronic certificates have given very low concerns on the authenticity. The agency has only received 4 authorities of importing countries that have approached the agency for confirming a total of 139 electronic certificates, around 1%. This gives us that the electronic certificates are widely accepted by the regulatory authorities in the importing countries. Next slide, please. How to request a certificate to EMA? The marketing authorization holders are the only ones that can request an electronic certificate to EMA or any other entity that is approved. Now they can only request certificates in electronic format. We are not giving any printed certificates. The agency has 2 procedures. One that is urgent, and it will be within 2 working days, or the standard certificate procedure that will be issued in 10 working days. The certificates are requested by mail and are sent electronically to MAH applicant. The format is based in just one product and is based on just one single medicinal product. The validity of the certificate issued by the agency reflects which is the status of the authorization of the date the certificate is issued. No validity or expiration date is assigned to the certificates. Our certificate reflects the status of the EU marketing authorization on the date the certificate is issued. In the next slide, we have detailed the format and content of the electronic certificates. It is based on the electronic certificate system of the World Health Organization, and here it's a guide of the recommendations issued by the World Health Organization. This agency issued the certificates in different languages, Spanish, French, or English, or it can be in Portuguese. The first part of the certificate includes the country, details of the medicinal product, the pharmaceutical form, details of the marketing authorization in the European Union, the status.
Following slide, please. So all different CPPs have a page in which you will find the electronic signature. In the multilingual certificates, the ones that are in English, Spanish, and French, these are on page 4, and in the ones issued in Portuguese, these are found on page 2. The agency has published an informative note where we basically detail all the different parts of the document, which are the ones that basically guarantee the integrity and validity of the certificate. All certificates are based on an advanced electronic signature, which complies to EU regulation. This basically validates that the document is signed by the person and it has only been authorized by his or her sole control. Therefore, it has been signed at that exact moment, dated, and once this document is signed, any modification, non-authorized modification or manipulation can be detectable. Therefore, this electronic signature system guarantees fully that the document is valid and authentic. Therefore, any, as I mentioned, unauthorized manipulation is detectable, and it can be detected easily. Next slide, please. So aside from all the different characteristics that the eCPP has in the PDF format, the agency has implemented additional measures to provide further assurance of the authenticity of our eCPPs. So as I mentioned before, we have published an informative note explaining this on our webpage, where we explain all the different safety features of eCPPs. And in this one, we also, for example, explain how to identify if a certificate has been manipulated or not. We also share other measures that I will comment in the following slide. Following slide, please. Following slide, please. So, in the letter for authorization for signatories, we basically have proposed this letter signed by the executive director, where basically we detail all EMA staff that is authorized to sign electronic certificates. So any authority from importing countries can request copies of the letter directly to the EMA. However, this document guarantees that the person that has signed the document is legally authorized by the executive director for this letter to be signed. This basically provides greater safety so that the document is a genuine and authentic document. Following slide, please. Another measure that the EMA will implement is the launching of an online verification system for eCPPs. This system is already developed, and our proposal is, or we intended to publish it before this webinar. However, unfortunately, due to technical problems, we have not been able to launch it today, and we hope to launch it after the end of the month. This online verification system for eCPPs will allow that authorities of importing countries and any interested party can confirm the authenticity and the details of an eCPP issued on the EMA website. And the way this works, this online verification system works, is through the identification numbers that each certificate has, which are uniquely linked only to that certificate. Now, in the upper right corner, all certificates issued by the EMA include a certificate number that, as I mentioned, is unique, and also a request number. Now, using these online verification system, we will be able to obtain different details of our certificates, and therefore we can confirm its authenticity. In the following slide, we will see an example. So including these numbers, we then must, for example, see to which importing country this certificate has been issued. In this example, it is for Guatemala, and it has been, and due to confidentiality, I have blurred out the medicinal product, and also the numbers of that you will see of the certificate number, both the request number are also fictional. And Also, we see the date on which it has been issued and signed by. Aside from this online tool, this online tool will also tell us that this certificate is valid and that it has been signed electronically. Certificates will appear in this online verification system on the following day after these have been issued. Therefore, 24 hours after issuing a certificate, you will be able to confirm within our online tool that this is authentic. Aside from these different measures, the EMA has also established an email address that can be used for any query related to certificates issued by EMA. The EMA surveils this email address on a daily basis, and you can also verify any eCPP by sending it to us to this email that you're seeing on the screen right now. The EMA certificates team normally answers in maximum 2 days to confirm the authenticity of the certificate. When we launch the new online tool, this process won't be necessary to be done through email. However, you can once again send any query related to certificates issued by the EMA to this email. Once again, any authority from importing countries that have any questions about the acceptation of an eCPP, you can send your case and information through this email address and we can discuss it. The following slide, please. So the EMA has implemented an electronic system for pharmaceutical products, and in this world that we live in now, that is more and more fully digital, we believe that eCPPs are the future. Why? Well, this allows a dissemination of information that is quicker. When we launched this service, we had discussions with the WHO, which, as was commented before, highly supported the initiative and confirmed its compatibility with the current WHO certification scheme. Likewise, the EMA shared the experience to other interested issuing authorities that were also considering the implementation of eCPPs. And likewise, our EMA International Affairs Division sent letters to approximately 70 receiving authorities, urging them to implement the necessary changes to their national regulatory systems to be able to accept eCPPs from the EMA. We must also say that there was a great collaboration with industry. FPA and Vaccines Europe allowed us to have information about the acceptability of our certificates in Europe. The implementation at a worldwide level of the eCPPs is because all the different stakeholders involved need to change the regulatory systems. However, this has great advantages in terms of assuring authenticity of the system and in a greater diffusion and dissemination of information, which basically translates to a greater access to medicine. Finally, as some last conclusions or final remarks, I would just like to say that the eCPP system is the way in which the EMA will issue CPPs in a permanent way, and it will also be the only format in which the biggest authorities in Europe can also request issues. The EMA does not issue any more printed or hard copy certificates. All the different security or safety features of the electronic document, as well as the additional measures implemented by the EMA, assure the integrity, validity, and authenticity of certificates issued by the EMA. The electronic signature guarantees that the eCPPs has full integrity and validity, and any unauthorized manipulation after the signature is detectable. I would even say that safety is even greater than a hard copy or printed format. The online verification tool on the EMA website will help us confirm that the eCPPs are authentic, valid, and that they have been signed by the authorized person. Following slide, please. The agency will continue supporting a worldwide implementation of electronic CPPs through international collaboration with the WHO, and we also understand that some importing countries require further legalization and apostille of the CPPs. In the EMA, we believe that this requirement is not necessary, and this is also supported by the WHO. So we must assure that all the safety features of the eCPP are full or enough guarantee, and that any further legalization is not necessary. Lastly, I would like to mention that most of receiving authorities currently accept CPPs issued by the EMA. However, any receiving authority that has not undertaken the necessary legal or technical changes in national regulatory systems, please contact us to discuss your case on a one-to-one basis. Finally, I would like to thank for your attention, and we are at your disposal for any questions that you may have after the next talk. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alberto, for this very clear presentation, and also clear for our work and also the flexibility that the EMA has to also talk and discuss with different regulatory agencies. Thank you very much, and I would like to remind everyone that you can share your questions during the sessions in el panel.
And now I would like to invite Dr. Mandy Singler from Pfizer, our global lead product license support, to give as our second speaker today to talk about FDA, the FDA practice and policy for issuing CPPs and eCPPs. So the floor is yours, Mandy.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Just introduce myself. I'm Mandy Ziegler. I'm the global lead for the registration and renewals team here in Pfizer. My team is responsible for sourcing ancillaries and samples for all of the emerging market submissions. I'm here today to share with you the FDA practices, policies for issuing CPPs that we in Pfizer follow. Next slide, please. Let me just start out with what is a CPP, right? This next slide, please. So the acronym, stands for Certificate of Pharmaceutical Product. It is a certificate to export human drug products, including biological drugs. The form conforms to the WHO certificate requirements, and it contains information about the pharmaceutical regulatory or marketing status in the United States, and is typically issued by the sourcing country health authority. Next slide, please. CPPs are commonly issued for approved drug products, over-the-counter products, also unapproved drug products, homeopathic drugs, and also drugs in a bulk package, also known as APIs. Next slide, please. The US FDA issued a CPP for drugs that are legally marketed in the United States, drugs that are not authorized for sale in the United States, but may be legally exported to a foreign country, and also for a foreign manufactured drug, which means made outside the United States, but exported from the United States. Next slide, please. Let's go ahead and look at the criteria that the US FDA goes ahead and for the US FDA. It is issued in paper form only. CPPs are for approved and unapproved products and foreign manufacturers. It's any product that is exported from the US or Puerto Rico. It's issued per dosage, strength, and formulation. All manufacturing sites listed on the CPP must be registered and approved with the FDA and comply with the current good manufacturing practices. The FDA issues a CPP in English language only. And the US FDA CPP expires 24 months from the date of issuance. The supporting documentation for the approved products include the US FDA initial approval letter, the drug product composition, the USPI, the US approved artwork labels, and the FDA CPP follows the WHO format. The GMP statement is contained within the CPP. The FDA guidance around issuance is 20 business days from the date that the application is received. And the FDA no longer notarizes CPPs. Next slide, please. Looking at the foreign export CPPs, in 2020, the FDA issued a decision to suspend issuing the foreign export CPPs. And this was due to the lack of a legislative mandate within the US FDA that is required to support the program. The alternatives, the valid alternatives to a foreign export CPP is the issuance of a 90-day decisional letter. The FDA will now issue these to facility owners within 90 days of the end of an inspection per the GDUFA and the PDUFA commitments in the form of an email. Also, another alternative is the issuance of a market authorization letter. Next slide, please. The FDA will not issue a CPP for the following reasons. Failure of the manufacturing facility or facilities to operate in compliance with the GMP regulations, unless the particular exported product is not affected by the specific GMP deficiencies. They will not go ahead and issue a CPP for manufacturing facility or facilities that are not registered or listed with the FDA. And the final reason for not issuing a CPP is when the product is not exported from the United States. Next slide, please. Let's go ahead and look at what it takes to apply for an FDA CPP. All applications for a US FDA CPP it must be, the online form is through the Federal CEDAR and Ecpps portal. So all of the applications for a US FDA CPP must be done online. The required information, okay, that is needed for the application is the authorization to release information, the billing contact information, certification statement, the name of the applicant, and the applicant's contact information, the country of destination, also the federal tax identification number, and the FDA marketing authority, the marketing status in the exporting country, so in the US, the status of the applicant, the complete manufacturing facility address along with the facility registration number. You need to indicate the number of certificates that you're requesting. You also need to include the US trade name, which is the drug product's brand name, and then of course the bulk substance generic name. Next slide, please. Let me share with you the required information by the type of application. So if you are applying for a CPP for an approved drug product, you would need to have the NDA, the ANDA, or the AADA approval letter. You will also need to have the container label or label, the package container, the package insert, and the status of the product license holder. For over-the-counter drug product, the required information is the title of the applicable monograph, the product label or labels, and the immediate package container label. Looking at the unapproved drug products, the required information for a US CPP is the product identification statement and the product composition. For an API, you need the original sample of the current bulk container label. And for export only CPP is a formulation page. And for a foreign manufactured drug, you need the certification of the exportation from the US for foreign manufacturing sites. Next slide, please. When you apply for a US FDA CPP, the CPPs are issued with different colored ribbons, and the ribbons designate the type of CPP. So for a red ribboned CPP, that is for approved drug products, over-the-counter marketed per monograph, and export-only drugs. The blue ribbon CPP is for unapproved drug products not marketed in the US. And the yellow ribboned CPPs are for drugs manufactured outside of the US or exported from the US. And for yellow ribbon CPPs, that represents your drug substance or API. I've also included on the slides, and you'll see this on a couple of the slides, a URL, which is the URL to the FDA.gov website that shares, specific information, okay, around guidance on this. Next slide, please. And finally, let me just also share with you that the FDA, issues other export certificates. They issue certificates of free sale, health certificates for food and feed, along with specified risk materials of bovine, ovine, and caprine origin certificates, non-clinical research use only certificates, and certificates to foreign governments, as well as certificates of exportability. This is my last slide, so I want to go ahead and thank you for your time today. And I'd like to pass it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I now would like to invite you, and I know that the audience has been quite active in adding the questions to the Q&A box, but I should only encourage you to continue doing so. I would like now to give the floor to Dr. Samuel Azatian from the World Health Organization. Samuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Camila and colleagues, for inviting me to this important meeting. It's a great pleasure to see the interest of the regulators and other parties to this important topic. I'm Samuel Azatian from WHO. I'm working in the organization now for more than 20 years, and all the time more or less in the same area of work, which is support to national regulatory authorities, and support to WHO certification scheme is also part of the responsibilities of my team. Next slide, please. Yeah, next one, please. So just a little bit of background and history for this important topic. The short name of this scheme, which is well known, is WHO Certification Scheme. But in fact, the full name is longer, which is here on the title of my slide, WHO Certification Scheme on the Quality of Pharmaceutical Products Moving in International Commerce. And this name causes a lot of confusion, in fact. Also among many of the parties. And I can tell you almost every day I'm receiving queries from different countries about is WHO itself issuing certificates? Is WHO able to certify our facility, and so on and so forth? And just to clarify that even though it is a WHO certification scheme, WHO itself is not a certifying authority. This is very clear, and WHO has only provided the format and the guideline for this scheme. So the scheme is itself a voluntary agreement between the countries that are participating in the scheme. And the idea is to provide assurance for quality of pharmaceutical products moving in international commerce. The scheme for the first time was introduced in 1969 when it was adopted by the 22nd World Health Assembly in Boston, USA. At that time, World Health Assembly is still taking place in our member states, and you know, more recently it is only taking place in Geneva. The scheme also recommended, the assembly recommended also to adopt the scheme, but also the requirements for good practices in manufacture and quality control of drugs, which was later on becoming well known as GMP. The scheme has been revised many times, and one of the most important revision was in 1975 by the 28th World Health Assembly. And there are several documents that are issued that are part of the scheme, but the most important document is the Certificate of Pharmaceutical Product, or CPP. Next slide, please. Yeah, we currently have 150 WHO member states. So not all of them. We have overall 194 countries. So 150 are currently members of WHO certification scheme, plus one regional regulatory authority, which is European Medicines Agency. And the list is available on WHO website. Next slide, please. Yeah, and there were some important milestones in the evolution of the scheme, such as during the 37th meeting of Expert Committee on Specification of Pharmaceutical Products in October 2001, it was decided to consider the recommendations of 10th International Conference of Drug Regulatory Authority, which took place in 1999, about issuing certificates of the scheme. And also there was a paper advocating the preparation of electronic certificates on the websites of regulatory authorities. So you can see that the debates about possibilities of using electronic certificates or other electronic means of verification of the status of the product is going back to 2001. The scheme, as I've mentioned, has several type of certificates or documents, and it refers in fact to three types of products. It is pharmaceutical products intended for human use, pharmaceutical products intended for use in food producing animals, and certificates for active pharmaceutical ingredients. But the scheme has been also expanded in 2001 for certification of pharmaceutical starting materials moving in international commerce. And the guidelines were also adopted at that time. But so far, we have only one country in this expansion of the scheme, and this is Poland. Next slide, please. Yeah. So another important milestone in the evolution of the scheme was in 2008, when again the Expert Committee on Specification for Pharmaceutical Products recommended to review the WHO certification scheme, trying to consider all the changes in global regulatory environment and the globalization of regulatory work. The expert committee analyzed the situation based on the proposed recommendations and made recommendations on the update of the scheme. And as a follow-up action for WHO was to prepare a question and answer document, which was an attempt to provide clarifications for many important and vital questions that were coming from the users of the scheme. And this document was published on the website after being discussed by the expert committee. And there was also a decision to mail a circular letter to all WHO member states. It is a standard procedure for WHO to seek comments for one or another document. And we have unfortunately received a very little number of responses. Next one, please. Yes, following the recommendations by the expert committee in October 2014 to update the question and answers document, because the previous one was considered as not addressing all necessary questions. So it was decided to update the questions and answer document. And it was again developed with the proposal to the member states to provide comments. And there was in the same time in 2014, there was a survey conducted by WHO, which also somehow triggered the IFPMA CPP network team to update the question and answers published on WHO Drug Information Journal. And the updated document was also subsequently circulated for comments in June 2015. And with the expectation that there will be some recommendations after this round of global consultations by the WHO expert committee. Next slide, please. Yes, and the feedback was from IFPMA CPP network was very important for us. In fact, it highlighted all the challenges which we were aware of, and which many of the users have also highlighted. First of all, lack of modernization of the CPP scheme that was recognized by IFPMA members in relation to the interpretation of the scheme. There were many clarities or possibilities for double interpretation of some of the statements. Also, consequently, these inequalities, they were leading to longer lead times for the products reaching the markets. And of course, it was also related to sometimes quite complex specific national legislation in some of the countries in relation to certificates for pharmaceutical products. But also, it was noted that some of the countries are not really adhering to WHO template that was proposed for certificates for pharmaceutical products, and it was also causing some delays and problems. And IFPMA, in its document, recognized that there is an opportunity to promote some best practices for better adherence to the original purpose of the scheme, and this would serve all users of the scheme. In fact, this also resulted in creation of IFPMA CPP toolkit, and we are collaborating with IFPMA in trying to make the scheme better and better serving its purpose, and also becoming more clear in interpretation of various statements and scenarios, including scenarios to provide context for better understanding how CPPs could be better utilized. And also, again, as we are now living in a very dynamic world, also to evaluate the role of the certification scheme and CPP certificates in this changing regulatory environment, considering all the recent developments on good regulatory practices and some instruments, some mechanisms for acceleration of products in the countries, such as collaborative registration procedure and so on. Next slide, please. So as I have mentioned, we are now in a daily routine communication with the countries and still trying to refine some of the questions, some of the challenges existing in interpretation and implementation of the scheme through communication with the users, with our member states and other users of the certificates. And some of the main challenges, some of the issues that were mentioned during this routine communication include countries issuing CPPs but not participating formally in WHO scheme. And so some participants are asking whether it is legal for them to issue CPPs or not, if they are not formally part of the scheme. Also, there are many questions about authenticity and validity of certificate. And I'm happy that my previous speakers have already mentioned that they have introduced quite interesting mechanisms for assuring authenticity and validity of certificate. Also, there are many debates, again, about paper certificates versus electronic. And again, I'm looking now in the questions and answers, and I see this is one of the most burning questions. And if countries agree to use electronic certificates, what it should be PDF by email, or it should be the link to secure website where recipients could download the certificate from with electronic signature. So there are many questions such these ones. And also, if it is a downloadable certificate, should it be a single download of original certificate, or multiple copies could be also downloaded? Next slide, please. So you can see that, of course, these questions were quite important, and not always there were good answer for these questions, because again, as I have mentioned, WHO has only proposed the template and the general guidance on the scheme. And it is, in fact, at the discretion of the individual country to implement the scheme and to link it with the existing regulations and legislation of the country. So this is why we are sometimes seeing quite different ways of interpretation of the scheme and this provision. And to address these challenges also, of course, there was a need for future and more discussions. And it was decided that in one of the ICTRA meetings, which in fact it was the most recent one, 18th ICTRA meeting in Dublin, Ireland, we have even organized a workshop in the pre-ICTRA meeting, a workshop on certification of pharmaceutical products. Is it still fit for purpose in a modern environment? It was a very lively session with the participation of regulators, industry, and even patient organizations. And the objectives, of course, were also to try to answer those burning questions, promote awareness that WHO certification scheme is being revised based on the request from the member states and by the expert committee on specifications for pharmaceutical products. And the idea was also to solicit some sort of informed input on the revision process for it to be based on the expectations of the recipients of the scheme. And also there is one important issue that I have mentioned in my first slide, that the scheme was proposed by the World Health Assembly, which is the highest body governing WHO's work. And so if something is proposed by the World Health Assembly, it cannot be changed by any other forum that is lower in its authority than WHA. So we were also seeking support for possible presentation in one of the World Health Assemblies with a view to update the scheme. Next one, please. Next slide, please. Yes. So triggered by the discussions at the 18th International Conference of Drug Regulatory Authorities, we were embarked in a series of modifications which have occurred with the aim to respond to changing regulatory global environment. And of course, we also with the understanding that the scheme has been approved several decades ago and attracted both controversy and support. And there were many discussions about its value, especially now in the modern so-called internet world, where we have many other instruments of requesting the information from the manufacturing country about characteristics of the product that is submitted for registration. Of course, the scheme was proposed in the time when even fax was not existing as an instrument of sharing the information. And now we are living in a different world. Of course, the evolution process of the scheme has involved many different steps during last years until it was last time updated in 2020, last year. And these very principal changes were endorsed by the 55th WHO Expert Committee on Specifications of Pharmaceutical Products, and the report of this meeting is almost ready and will be published by end of this month. Next one, please. Yeah, so what kind of process was behind this most recent modification? We had 2 rounds of global consultations within 2018 and 2019, and this is also a mandatory process in WHO. We can't amend or change any of our governing documents without seeking comments from our member states. So 2 rounds of global consultations took place. More than 180 comments were raised from 18 different entities, including 9 national regulatory authorities, 1 regional authority, 3 pharmaceutical associations, and some pharmaceutical manufacturers and other parties interested in this process. And then there was a comprehensive overview of all these suggested amendments. They were prepared, systematized, and a proposal was developed on how we can address this important feedback from the reviewers for each of the comments that we have received. And then the process also included the revision of the guideline of the document from January to August 2020. And this revision was done by the International Working Group, which was comprised of regulators from 14 national and regional regulatory authorities from both importing and exporting countries. And these participants, these parties were brought together last year in August, just before another meeting of WHO expert committee. Next slide, please. So this is what the expert committee last year in October discussed and agreed in terms of the proposed revisions for the scheme. And these revisions were endorsed by the expert committee. And there were some important changes. First of all, with regards to the membership, initial scheme was only considering membership by individual countries, by individual country national regulatory authorities. The new revision also considered the new reality of existence of European Union and European Medicines Agency. So it is also now inclusive of regional organizations. So other regional organizations would be also able to join the scheme. Of course, initially the scheme was considered as a substitute for quality, safety, efficacy reviews. Now it is not anymore. And CPP, it was decided that CPP should not be requested in the countries that have the full capacity to conduct quality, safety, and efficacy reviews, unless there are some specific situations and some rationale to request the certificate. And also there have been many cases of counterfeit certificate or forging certificates, and they were supplied to competent authorities of importing countries. And to avoid this and to try to address this challenge, it was also suggested that, again, email addresses, telephone and website addresses should be provided in the certificate as contact information, so that any authority that is requesting certificate can easily verify the authenticity of this information provided by in certificate, just contacting the certifying authority. Next slide, please. Yeah, and some other changes were also included in this revision. First of all, the lead times of the certifying authorities sometimes can be very long, and this has been also mentioned by previous speakers. And I'm happy to see that both EMA and US FDA and Swissmedic, they are all, they are all trying to supply recipients with certificates with the shortest possible timeline. And it was suggested at this revision that ideally it should be within 20 to 30 working days. Also, the very important question about the legalization of certificates or additional stamps or any other means of confirming the legality of certificates. I can tell you that even in the initial scope of the certificate in certification scheme, it was not really expected to be done, and in this revision it was also suggested that legalization should not be requested as much as possible, and electronic means of issuing certificates would be sufficient, as they are quite perfectly sufficient in banking area, in internet, in many other areas where the legalization is not anymore requested. Of course, also there were some inconsistencies with regards to the trade name of the product between the importing country and the certifying country. And it was also agreed that the model template of CPP should be revised in order to consider this this situation and so that the proposed trade name in the importing country can be stated in the certificate, because sometimes there are some discrepancies. And lastly, important revision was with regards to the statement of marketing authorization, the appendix 2 of the scheme. It was decided that it may not be used anymore. And the statement of marketing authorization should be removed to simplify the scheme if it has not been used anymore. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is just to address the issues which all my previous colleagues have already mentioned. The COVID-19 pandemic has, of course, dramatically affected our lives in all areas, and including in the area of certification. And some national regulatory authorities and regional regulatory authorities, such as EMA, have approached WHO, indicating that during this COVID-19 crisis, they will not be longer anymore in a position to issue and send paper copies of certificate issued in the context of WHO scheme. And instead, they wanted to maintain this critical service by using secure e-signature process. And they were asking whether this suggestion, this expectation fits into WHO guideline, into WHO context for certification scheme. And these are just the examples of countries. It is European Medicines Agency, and there are some member countries of European Union, such as Italy. There was a suggestion from Health Canada, from MHRA UK, from some other countries on the use of electronic certificates. And we have responded to them formally and also on our website that this initiative, in fact, does not contradict the current WHO guideline, and WHO instead recommends other regulatory authorities issuing certificates to consider this approach to simplify the processes and to make them faster. And that we were also urging NRAs receiving certificates to accept the electronic signature. And we consider this as a good example of regulatory flexibility in response to COVID-19 pandemic. And in fact, as in many other areas, the COVID pandemic was a trigger for some dramatic changes in some areas which were traditionally considered as very conservative and not really willing to change. But the change has happened overnight, suddenly. And of course, we will be supportive to the idea of maintaining these processes even when the pandemic is over. So we do not expect those countries that are already issuing electronic certificates to turn back to paper certificates when the pandemic is over. Instead, we are advocating for more and more countries to join this process. The next slide, please. Yeah, and this is my last slide. Instead of conclusion about WHO certification scheme in the modern environment. And we can state that the recent changes in pharmaceutical industry and pharmaceutical area and the whole evolution of regulatory science, we see that the application of certification scheme becomes more and more challenging. But despite some limitations, our member states are still acknowledging the value of WHO certification scheme as one of the important instruments for exchange of regulatory information between WHO member states, national regulatory authorities. And in fact, the reality is that not all the countries are at the same stage. And we can't, of course, even when we are supporting switching to electronic certificates, it should be mentioned that it is not a mandatory requirement, it is a recommendation. And many countries still have provisions in their national regulations for requesting paper certificates. And of course, we have to be able to respect this existing requirements, but still advocating for gradual change to more modern approaches. And the implementation of changes recommended by member states, of course, would strengthen the scheme and improve its compliance with its goal towards assuring quality medicines circulating in international commerce. And I think this was my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Samuel, for this nice presentation and overview about WHO that will help tremendous our region. And now I would like to remind the audience to have their questions in the question and answers box. A todos los participantes pueden añadir sus preguntas en la caja de preguntas y respuestas. And now, so we are going to start our question and answer session. And I would like to invite Dr. George Mansur, the head of section of certificates and license at Swissmedic, to join us. And I will give the floor for a small introduction, Samuel. So you can introduce yourself, George.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to take part in the panel discussion. I'm very pleased and honored to be part of this team. I thank all the other participants for the presentations. Swissmedic is the Swiss Authority for Medicinal Products and Medical Devices. I'm the head of the Certificates and Licenses section. As you may know, Switzerland is not a member of the European Union. Nevertheless, we are in the middle of Europe, and we have a mutual recognition agreement with the European Union, as well as with Canada, covering the GMP inspection system. So, yeah, I'm pleased to take your questions and to give some answers to this. Thank you very much for inviting me again.
Thank you very much, George. And I have straight away a question for you from our chat. And the first question that I have here for you today, will the new WHO scheme change the certificates as issued by the Swissmedic? Is the Swiss also considering the implementation of electronic CPPs?
For the moment, frankly speaking, we were not on this way, but it will be a great improvement, I think, if the other authorities will recognize the electronic signatures as well. So to us, electronic signature is only valid as long as the document is electronic. If you copy this document as a paper, then you only have a copy of a signed document, which is not legal anymore to our knowledge. But I'm happy to discuss this with other authorities that have already implemented the electronic signature, and to hear, I read some of the questions regarding the apostille and other legalization of the documents, and I'm happy to hear the comments of my other colleagues here on the floor.
Definitely. That is in our next sections of questions that we try to group them with the help of Camilla. So it's about legalization and apostille. And I have a question first for WHO. And for you, Samuel, so the questions that we have here is, should governments ask for legalization, or they use the word apostille, in CPPs, and why and where legalization is a requirement? What are WHO recommendations for not only for industry, but as well for regulators?
Thank you, Pedro, and I thank also participants for this important question. And the WHO position is very clear. We are requesting and suggesting not to request legalization or apostillization of certificates as much as it is possible and as much as it fits into the legal environment of the respective country. Unfortunately, this legalization issue is more general. It doesn't really only addressing certificates for pharmaceutical products, but in many countries, it is part of the overall legislation. And sometimes for them to make this little change, they need to change the whole legislation. And to change the legislation, you know, it's a long process. You have to involve the parliament, and it takes years. It's not something that could be done overnight. So it doesn't mean that they don't want to change. They want to change, but sometimes it takes change. It takes time, and the politicians are not always, you know, the great supporters of regulators in these contexts. So this is unfortunately the problem.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your answer. And then I have a similar question for both regulators in our table, for Alberto and as well for George. For regulators of our panel, are the regulators those who legalize or apostille a document? How can regulatory authorities in reference countries support regulators in the countries that use CPPs to rational their requirements? So there are two questions. That the first question is about legalize apostille a document. So would you like to start, Alberto?
Thanks, Pedro. I endorsed the comment made before by Samuel that, I mean, we acknowledge and we understand that there are some legal challenges at the national level for importing countries. What I want to give reassurance is that from the technical point of view, I mean, the certificates and especially the electronic format fully guarantee the integrity and authenticity. So somehow the apostille is a redundant. It does not give much value added. So at the moment, in the electronic signature features give confidence that the person that has signed, that the person that signs the document is really the person that signs it. And if we give if the issuing authorities will give further reassurance that that person is the one that should sign, I mean, this apostille becomes redundant because we already are providing exact full confidence that the person is who needs to sign, and the electronic signature already provides that that person is the one that has signed. So for me, it will become redundant from the technical point of view. But I fully understand from Samuel that from the legal point of view, it's in part of the legislation of many countries and it takes time, although our position is that it is something that is redundant, and we urge authorities to start changing their legal systems as much as possible. So with regards to how the agency supports, I mean, for these apostille bodies, sometimes are notaries or sometimes are embassies. If they contact the European Medicines Agency, we always acknowledge that we have issued the certificate. So normally they contact us through email via our email mailbox, and we provide full reassurance that the document is authentic, so that they can proceed with the apostille and legalization. So far, these bodies have not told us that there have been any problems. I presume, but I'm not sure, that they do printed copies of our electronic certificates, and this is what they provide. But I mean, we have not had any report of problems with that process. So, but the agency is fully supporting for those countries that still have these systems.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Very clear. And George, any additional comments from Swiss Medics on these two questions?
So from our side, we still issue CPPs on paper, and the apostille is brought by the Federal Chancellery, so part of the Swiss government, and then the documents go to the consulates or embassies of the recipient countries here in Switzerland. And so then they can assess that the persons from the Federal Chancellery is signing these apostille are the ones entitled to identify our, to legalize our signatures with Swissmedic. So, but we also consider this step as redundant, and we are clearly in favor of simplification because the documents we sign are on a certain type of paper, and it could be traced back. So it wouldn't be a big improvement to have more signatures on the documents. But as already mentioned by my colleagues, we understand that some legislation must be updated in order to allow that some paper documents are not legalized via these apostille.
Many thank you, George. And now I'm going to select some questions from our chat for answers. And the first question that I'd like to have a view of the regulator in this case probably will be EMEA because of Cpps, and as well from WHO the perspective. So the question is there any way to have a hard copy of Cpps for those authorities who want to have it because they are including their legislation? So Alberto, would you like to comment on that?
Okay. So we have had very good experience with electronic certificates, and so far they have been accepted by most by authorities in most important countries. So the agency currently cannot issue printed copies of certificates, and in the future our system will only issue electronic certificates. So the message I want to pass is that the pharmaceutical industry will only be able to request electronic certificates, so they will not be able to request printed copies. However, we understand that some authorities in importing countries have not yet fully adapted their own regulatory systems, either from legal point of view or from technical point of view. So the agency in these situations, when they have any challenge to accept a specific certificate, we recommend them to contact us through our certificates mailbox, and our team will discuss with them directly what the agency can help them in order to fulfill their local legal requirements. But the message I want to pass is that we will not issue printed copies to pharmaceutical industry, and pharmaceutical industry cannot request in the future any more printed copies. However, for those authorities who really have problems, we recommend them to contact us, and we can discuss the issue on a specific submission that they may have received.
Many thanks, Alberto. Any additional remarks, Samuel, from WHO perspective on these requirements?
Yeah, I support what Alberto has mentioned, and this is very much in line with our expectations also in WHO. But again, just to mention that the WHO has no whatsoever superiority to the countries. WHO is not a supranational organization, it's an international organization. So we are just a secretariat. We serve our member states, and we have to do what they are asking us to do. And these suggestions were considered as a recommendation by our member states. So we transform them into global recommendation to the countries, but it remains at the discretion of each individual country on how they should implement it in their respective jurisdictions. So I share the same thoughts as Alberto, that as much as possible we should move to the new modern way of issuing certificates, but still respecting some specifics that could be still existing in some countries. But also to mention that it's not always a technical problem or not even a legal problem, but it's sometimes a problem of history. In some countries, especially like in other regions, not in American region, but in other regions of WHO. There were some countries when we were assessing their regulatory systems, specifically with regards to CPPs, and we're asking them, why do you ask so many questions? Why do we have so big discrepancies and deviations from WHO proposed format. And they were saying, they were responding that we don't know. It is existing now for so many years. It has been proposed 25 years ago when I was not even born. The officer is responding. So how he or she can be liable and responsible to answer about something that was existing for 30 years now?
Yeah.
And another problem is that for some countries, there is also an economical interest, I would say, because this legalization and apostillization is not free of charge. I can also give you some examples that some countries require that each and every page of the dossier has to be, put with initials of the officer, stamped, and for each stamp they charge money. So if you have 5,000 pages in the dossier with the certificate, then imagine. So it is sometimes emotionally difficult also for them to get rid of this, and this is the income of the country. So very sorry, but this is the reality.
Thank you very much, Samuel, for this clarification. And now I have here a very interesting question. It's more for AMEA, but I would like to see as well the views from Swissmedics about the primary packaging. Here, the question is asked in Spanish if the certificates, the CPPs, include any information or optional about the primary packaging. Could you clarify, Alberto? Any description of primary packaging in the CPPs?
At the moment, no, this is not part of the points, recommended in the WHO. So we do not include the primary packaging details in our CPP. We include we can include information about the site where the primary packaging takes place, and of course the confirmation of the GMP conformity of the packaging site. However, I have to say that they can find information on the primary packaging in the SMPC and in the labeling. So in those cases, yes, they can have all the information because somehow it is implicitly. It's not part of the CPP, but it is part of the labeling included in the annexes. So somehow we can include from that point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Alberto. And from Swissmedics, the perspective of other.
100% in line with the position of EMA. So we're not certifying anything outside of the current scheme of the WHO. So we try to stick as much as possible to the information scheme requested according to this WHO scheme. And we try to avoid to multiply the information that has to be certified. So, but as already mentioned, some of the information may be found in some other documents which are part of the annexes that we can provide with this certificate, but the primary packaging steps are not part of the scheme as defined by WHO.
Thank you very much, George. And here I have a question. I'd like to have the views first of the regulators and as well from WHO. It's about the validity of the CPPs. So do they have any validity? So I will start with Albert again, and then George, and then Samuel.
Well, in our case,
would you like to answer, Alberto, about the validity?
Yes, in our case at EMA, we only certified the conditions of the marketing authorization on the day that it has been issued. So we normally, what we confirm is that all the information that is included in the certificate is valid on the day we are issuing. We don't include really any expiry period or any validity time, because we leave this more at the discretion of the authorities that that are receiving the certificates. It's true that the certificate will remain valid as long as there are no changes to the product, any change to the marketing authorization in Europe. So this is more or less the approach that the agency is following. I don't know if George, in Swissmedic, you have a similar approach or slightly different.
Yeah.
Totally similar. So the variations submitted by the companies are mainly triggered by their own decisions. So we cannot provide any guarantee for the day tomorrow. So the day after tomorrow is something quite we don't know at the moment. So we issue a certificate on the date, and this is the current valid data we have in our database. And if the company submits a new variation in 2 weeks' time, we cannot handle this. So that's why we do not set any validity date for these certificates. So it's up to the recipient authority or recipient part to check if this current enough for them to accept, or is this already 2 years old, and then they shall ask for a new one.
Any views from WHO on this aspect? You'd like to add something, Samuel?
Yeah, just to add that the WHO scheme is not specifying let's say, expiry date of the certificate. It only specifies the date of issue. There must be a very clear, if it is a paper certificate, then there must be a day of issue and stamp for it to be clear. And if it is an electronic certificate, then the day of issue is already electronically secured in the certificate. And of course, this is another argument for switching to electronic certificates, because imagine if you are issuing paper certificate, which still needs legalization, apostillization, by the time it reaches the recipient, it may be 6 months after. And so then of course, it decreases the whole value and respect to this document. So, and Alberto has mentioned very correctly, and the same is George, certificate is valid as is, the date of its issuance. That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
I want
Alberto?
to complement that I think the regulatory agencies, we are doing an effort to streamline and to shorten as much as possible the timelines for issuing certificates. I mean, at the agency, as I mentioned, we have a big number issued within 2 days, and at the moment we are issuing in 14 days, but some months ago we were issuing in 5-6 days. So I mean, there is a big value that in this world where the information goes so fast from one place to another. I mean, it's really valuable that we use electronic systems to pass the information. And then the apostille, I fully agree, it's only including burden and against the timeliness that we are doing the issuing of the certificate. So ultimately, at the end, this new system allows a faster introduction of medicines in importing countries, and we should, I think, we should all work towards that direction.
Thank you very much. We have a question here from Andy about the alternatives. What are the alternatives to the foreign export CPPs from FDA?
So thank you for the question. As I mentioned, alternatives that the FDA offers for foreign exports is the issuance of a 90-day decisional letter. So the FDA will issue, the inspection clarifications to facility owners within 90 days of the end of an inspection. And then the other alternative is the issuance of a market authorization letter. So the FDA provides an MA letter in lieu of the foreign export CPP.
Good. Thank you, Mandy.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for your clarification. And to finish our round of questions, because we have a lot and we have to select some of them. So I have here one question. So it's in Spanish. I will use my translation, my translation skills. Is about the information about manufacturing sites, about the active substance. Are they included in the CPPs of EMEA and Swissmedic? So do you have information about manufacturing sites of the active substance, Alberto and George?
Yes, Swissmedic does provide this information. If it's required with the annex regarding all the details of all manufacturing sites. So the companies ordering these certificates may ask us to list all the manufacturing sites, including APIs. So it's part of the supplementary annex we can deliver.
Thank you, George. And what about EMEA, Alberto?
The
You are
EMEA,
muted.
yeah, sorry,
okay.
yes, thank you. The EMEA does not include the information of the manufacturers of active ingredients. In the case of biologicals, it can be requested and we can include what we call the Annex 2, which includes the manufacturer of the active ingredients of biological medicinal products, but in principle is not part of the information that we include in our certificates.
Thank you, Alberto. Any remarks from WHO? It was more for regulators, but if you'd like to.
I think it's exactly in the line with what Alberto has explained. It's not a mandatory requirement. It could be included if the issuer is willing to do so, but in fact, it's just the GMP status of the product that is part of the certificate, which on its own it's already inclusive of the information about. It is assumed already that the active pharmaceutical ingredient that is used is in compliance with GMP.
Yeah. Perfect, Samuel. So yeah, Alberto.
May I complement? So
yeah.
In Europe, we are normally asking as part of our regulatory process what we call a QP declaration, in which it is included all the information about the manufacturing of active ingredients. So, and all the internal audits that the companies need to perform, and if there has been any GMP inspection. So, in line of what Samuel has just mentioned, I mean, the reassurance that our manufacture of finished product complies with GMP requirements as recommended with the WHO, implicitly, we are already reassuring that all the manufacturers of API are in conformance with the legal requirements needed for Europe, and in fact is with compliance with good manufacturing practices. So what I want to give is reassurance that even if not explicitly mentioned, does not mean that they need to comply with, because it's implicitly included in our regulatory processes in Europe.
Thank you very much, Alberto, and thank you to George for these clarifications. And now I would like to pass the floor to my colleague, Camila Gomes. Camila, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pedro. First of all, I'd like to thank our speakers and our panelists for your participation and your flexibility to staying longer here with us today, and also to our awesome audience, more than 500 people that have interacted quite a lot with us and that have endured with us until the end of this discussion. I guess that this is a proof of how much appetite there is in the region for discussing issues related to CPP, Ecpps, the new WHO scheme, and how reference regulators deal with that. I would like to say that we were unable to address the more than 100 questions that arrived in the chat, in the Q&A box, and also via email to us. So what we are going to do is we will compile those questions, try to group them, not to make our speakers mad at us, and ask them to address some of them, and publish the results very soon in both FIFARMA's and Ecpps website. Following this webinar, you are going to receive all the presentations and also some supportive material, so links in the FDA and the EMA page, information about other reference regulators and how is the status of their issuing of CPPs and electronic CPPs, so that you can use inside your companies and hopefully also inside your agencies for those of you who are regulators. The recording for the session is also going to be available on YouTube, on FIFARMA's page on YouTube, both in English and in Spanish. So just gives us some time to be able to upload this content online, and all of you, more than 1,000 people who have registered in FIFARMA's website will be receiving this information. Thank you so much for being here with us. And on behalf of FPA, our LATAM FPA network, and FIFARMA, I have the pleasure of closing this very successful webinar today. Have a good day and good rest of the week, everybody.
Thank you very much, and have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.